The wind pressed cold fingers against the windshield as William Hartley guided his black Mercedes through the empty autumn streets. Leaves scattered across the road like fragments of something already gone. The city was waking slowly, coffee steam rising from corners, distant sirens, the hum of a life that had moved on without him. But William hadn't moved on. He parked near the old iron gates of St. Bridget's Cemetery and killed the engine. Silence. Even the wind seemed to hesitate, as if afraid to disturb his ritual. He stared ahead, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened. It had been 6 months since Ethan's funeral. 6 months since the world had hollowed out and left him walking through it like a shadow wearing a suit. Every morning he went to the office. Every night he came home to an empty house. The world believed he was still in control, but the truth was simpler and crueler. Control was all he had left. He reached to the passenger seat where a bouquet of immaculate white lilies waited. The florist had called them elegant. They were expensive, flawless, soulless, like everything else he owned. William stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching beneath polished shoes. The chill bit through his tailored coat as he followed the familiar path among the graves. He moved like a man trained to hide pain behind precision. Even now in this place, his steps were firm, his back straight, his face unreadable. But when he reached the grave, a smooth marble headstone glowing faintly under the grey sky, something in him cracked. Ethan Hartley, 1997-2025, beloved son. The golden letters gleamed as if mocking him. Beloved. The word pierced deeper than the date. He crouched slowly, his knees stiff, and placed the lilies into the stone vase. His hands trembled, despite the effort to keep them still. 6 months, he murmured, his voice a gravel whisper. 6 months, Ethan, and I still can't understand why. The sentence broke, unfinished. He inhaled sharply, forcing the mask back on. Control. Always control. And then he heard it. A muffled sound. A small sob. Somewhere nearby. William straightened, scanning the rows of stones. The noise came again. Fragile, like the sound of someone trying to hide tears. He turned. A girl stood partly hidden behind a leafless oak a few yards away. She couldn't have been more than 12 or 13. Her clothes were thin, mismatched, worn at the edges. In her small hands, she held a handful of wildflowers, some already wilted. She was crying. William's first reaction wasn't compassion, it was irritation, sharp and defensive. He was trespassing on his own grief, and she was an intruder. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. The girl startled, wiping her cheeks with the back of her sleeve. I came to visit." "Visit who?" he demanded, stepping forward, his posture instinctively dominant, an echo of boardrooms and negotiations. She hesitated. "Him," she said softly, pointing toward the headstone. "Ethan." For a moment, everything froze. The sky, the wind, his heartbeat, all of it stopped. He stared at her. "What did you just say?" His tone turned cold, dangerous. "Who told you that name?" No one. I knew him." Her voice trembled, but didn't falter. His chest tightened. "You knew my son?" he asked, disbelief dripping from each word. "That's impossible." "He was my friend," she said quietly. He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "My son didn't have friends like you." The cruelty slipped out before he could stop it, and the moment he saw her flinch, he hated himself for it, but the armor stayed on. "You're lying," he continued. "Ethan worked for me. He was in my company 70 hours a week. He didn't waste time with—" He gestured vaguely, unwilling to finish the sentence. The girl lifted her chin. Her eyes were rimmed red but held a quiet strength. "He came every Saturday morning, to the community center. He taught me math and English. He brought books, for me and the others." The air left William's lungs. "That's not true," he said quickly. "He was with me on Saturdays." She shook her head. "No, sir. He told me he lied to you, because you wouldn't approve." The words landed like a punch to the gut. He took a step back, the world tilting slightly. You expect me to believe that my son spent his weekends in some charity center teaching children he didn't know? Yes, she whispered. William stared at her, his thoughts scattering. Anger flared, anger at her, at himself, at a past he suddenly didn't recognize. Why would he do that? He asked, almost to himself. The girl's answer was simple. Because he cared about people, not money. Something cracked inside him. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The cemetery was quiet except for the soft rattle of dry leaves. He wanted to tell her to leave, to make this whole thing disappear. But something in her eyes, an honesty he hadn't seen in years, stopped him. Prove it, he said, his voice breaking despite the steel in it. Prove you knew him. She hesitated, then opened the worn backpack hanging from her shoulder. After rummaging a moment, she pulled out a thin, faded book, The Little Prince. The cover was torn, the edges soft from too many hands. She opened it carefully and handed it to him. William took the book, his fingers trembling. Inside, on the first page, was a short handwritten note. He recognized the handwriting instantly. For Sophie, who taught me that real wealth lives in the heart. Keep dreaming. Ethan. The world went quiet again. Only this time, it wasn't grief. It was realization. His knees gave out, and he sat heavily on the stone bench beside the grave. The cold seeped through his coat. Sophie, he murmured. That's your name. She nodded gently. He told me about you, she said after a moment. He said you never read to him when he was little, that you only talked about numbers and business. William's voice broke. I was building a life for him, he said, defensive even now. But he didn't want that, Sophie said softly. He wanted you. The words sliced clean through him. Memories flooded in. Ethan at 8 holding a soccer ball, later son I'm working. Ethan at 15 handing him a school essay. Leave it on my desk. Ethan at 22 trying to talk about a girl he'd met. Not now, I'm closing a deal. Each moment replayed like a knife twisting deeper. He talked about you a lot, Sophie continued, her small voice steady but full of ache. He said you were the smartest man he knew, but that you were too busy looking at numbers to see him. And then the dam broke. The tears he had buried for months, maybe years, came rushing out. He covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking. The sound was raw, human, unrestrained. Sophie hesitated, then touched his arm gently. He loved you, she whispered. He said you were difficult, but that one day you'd understand. William drew a shaky breath. It's too late, he said, voice hoarse. He's gone. It's not, Sophie replied. Her tone carried a wisdom far beyond her years. You can still do what he wanted. You can help people, like he did. He looked at her, this small girl his son had cared enough to teach, to write to change. Something inside him, something rusted and dormant, shifted. You said you got a scholarship, he asked after a long pause. Yes, sir. To a private school. I start next year. And the others? The children Ethan helped? Some got help too, but many are still waiting. He turned toward the gravestone. The decision formed like a sunrise in his mind. Quiet, inevitable, pure. I want to meet them, he said. All of them. And your mother. I want to create a foundation in Ethan's name. A fund for education. Sophie's face lit up. Tears returning, but this time from joy. You'd do that? I can't bring my son back, William said quietly, his eyes fixed on Ethan's name. And I can't undo the father I was, but I can honor the man he became. Sophie nodded. He'd be proud, she said simply. He extended his hand, rough and trembling. My name is William, and I'd like to hear more stories about my son. The real Ethan, not the one I thought I knew. Sophie took his hand. I have many to tell. They walked slowly toward the gates, the autumn wind brushing through the trees. Before leaving, William turned once more toward the grave. The wildflowers Sophie had placed lay beside his immaculate lilies. Somehow hers looked more fitting. He whispered, I lost my son, but I'll make it matter. As they walked away, the camera of memory lingered on the two sets of flowers, cheap and beautiful, rich and lifeless, mingling in the cold light of the cemetery. The sky was still the color of steel when William drove Sophie home. Neither of them spoke for most of the ride. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy, fragile, as if a single wrong word could break the thin bridge forming between them. Her hands rested in her lap, clutching the worn copy of The Little Prince. William glanced at it once, the sight making his throat tighten again. That book had survived what his heart hadn't. When they stopped in front of a small apartment complex on the city's south side, Sophie turned toward him. "You don't have to walk me in," she said softly. "I want to," he replied, surprising even himself. The building was old, its paint peeling, the smell of damp concrete hanging in the stairwell. As they climbed the narrow steps, William's polished shoes echoed too loudly, alien in this place. Sophie's mother opened the door. She was in her 40s, tired-eyed but kind-faced, wearing a janitor's uniform still dusted with cleaning powder. "Sophie?" she asked, startled, then looked at William standing behind her daughter. Her voice tensed. "Who is this?" Sophie hesitated, then said, "Mom, this is Mr. Hartley, Ethan's father." The woman's face softened and darkened at once. She lowered her head slightly, unsure whether to offer condolences or resentment. "I'm very sorry for your loss," she said quietly. William nodded stiffly. "Thank you, Mrs. Alvarez." She motioned them inside. The apartment was small but warm. Family photos covered the walls. Mismatched furniture filled the room, and a faint smell of cinnamon lingered in the air. It reminded him of a time when his own home had once held a scent other than sterile polish and imported leather. He sat carefully on the edge of a worn couch while Sophie poured 2 glasses of water. Her mother watched him, uneasy. "Sophie talks about Ethan all the time," she said after a long silence. "He was good to those kids. They loved him." William stared at his glass. "I didn't know," he said. "No," she replied, not unkindly. "You didn't." Her words weren't meant to wound, but they did. He turned to Sophie. "Tell me about him. What did he do there, at the center?" Sophie sat across from him, eyes bright. "He came every Saturday morning, always in the same grey sweater, always carrying a backpack full of books. We'd wait outside for him, me, Daniel, Nora, the twins. He'd teach us things we didn't learn at school. Math, grammar, but also about life." "What do you mean?" William asked. Sophie smiled faintly. "He said that money's only useful if it helps someone else, that everyone deserves a chance, even if they're born in the wrong place." William looked away. The words felt like small hammers, reshaping the man he'd become. "He fixed the roof one time," Mrs. Alvarez added, her tone softening. "Didn't even tell the priest, just came with tools and did it himself. Said the leaks were ruining the children's books." William couldn't imagine his son with a hammer. He could barely picture him outside the glass office walls where they'd worked together. "I didn't know he could do that," he murmured. Sophie said quietly, "There's a lot you didn't know." He didn't argue. For a while, the only sound was the creak of the ceiling fan. Then William leaned forward. "Sophie, how did you meet him?" "I was failing math," she said. "He volunteered to help. The first day I thought he'd give up. He looked so serious, like he didn't belong there, but then he made a joke about fractions and everyone laughed. After that, he came every week." She opened the book again, tracing a finger along the inside page where Ethan's handwriting glimmered faintly in the low light. "He said stories were the only thing that could make people listen to truth." William nodded slowly. He used to say something like that when he was little. That stories could fix people. The memory caught him off guard. Ethan at 7 building paper castles on the living room floor, telling his father that heroes didn't always wear suits. And William had laughed then, laughed at the idea. Now the echo of that laugh felt like a bruise. Mrs. Alvarez stood. "Would you like some tea?" He started to decline out of habit, but stopped himself. "Yes, thank you." As she moved to the kitchen, Sophie turned to him again. "He wanted to tell you," she said, "about the center, about everything, but he was afraid." "Afraid of what?" William asked. "Of disappointing you." The words landed softly, but they cut deep. He took a slow breath, staring at the worn carpet. He thought I'd be disappointed in helping people. He said you believed success was the only way to be happy, Sophie answered. And he didn't want to fight with you again. William closed his eyes. We did fight, he said. A few weeks before the accident. He stopped, swallowing hard. He told me he wanted to quit the company. I told him it was foolish, that he was throwing away everything I built. Sophie's small voice broke the silence. He cried that day, at the center. He tried to hide it, but we saw. William pressed a hand to his eyes. I remember that day, he whispered. I remember every word I said. God, I didn't know. Sophie said gently, he forgave you. He looked up, startled. He told you that? She nodded. He said that sometimes people forget how to love because they're too busy surviving. The truth of it hollowed him out. For a long time, he sat there, silent, the sound of boiling water in the kitchen, the only thing marking time. When Mrs. Alvarez returned with 2 chipped mugs, he accepted the tea with both hands. You don't owe me anything, she said, but I think it's good that you came. For her. For him. He nodded slowly. I want to see the place. The center. Sophie's eyes brightened. You really mean it? Yes, he said. If Ethan cared about it, I need to understand why. The next morning, William found himself driving to a part of the city he'd never visited before. The roads narrowed, buildings shrank, colors faded into gray. The community center sat at the end of a cracked street, its sign half broken, its walls covered with faded drawings made by children. Sophie was already there, waving from the gate. Over here, she called. He parked and stepped out, feeling strangely out of place in his tailored coat. The sound of children laughing spilled from inside, echoing off the concrete. This is it, Sophie said proudly, where Ethan changed everything. He looked around. A group of kids ran across the yard, chasing a ball with more enthusiasm than coordination. Inside, through the open doors, he could see shelves lined with second-hand books and plastic chairs arranged in circles. The smell of chalk and dust filled the air. It was nothing like the glossy offices he ruled, and yet it felt alive. A tall man in simple clothes approached, wiping his hands on a rag. You must be Mr. Hartley, he said, his voice calm and warm. I'm Father Gabriel. We've been expecting you. William hesitated before shaking his hand. My son. He worked here. Volunteered, the priest said, every Saturday without fail. He didn't want recognition, only to see them learn. As they walked through the hall, William noticed a mural on one wall, painted in bright, clumsy strokes. In the center was a figure holding a book, surrounded by children. At the bottom, someone had written in crooked letters, For Ethan, who believed in us. He reached out and touched the paint, his fingers trembling slightly. Father Gabriel said quietly, He had a gift, your son. The kind of kindness that doesn't come from wealth. William nodded, barely breathing. He never told me any of this. The priest looked at him with gentle eyes. Perhaps he wanted you to find it yourself. William turned to Sophie, standing nearby, watching him. He saw something in her face, hope, maybe, or forgiveness, and for the first time in years he wanted to deserve it. Will you tell me more, he asked her, about what he did here, about the others? Sophie smiled faintly. There's a lot to tell. They moved deeper into the center, children glancing curiously at the man in the expensive coat. One small boy tugged on his sleeve and asked, Are you the new teacher? William almost smiled. Not yet, he said. Outside, the afternoon light broke through the clouds for the first time that day, spilling across the cracked courtyard. William stood there, letting the warmth touch his face. Somewhere deep inside, a seed of something long forgotten began to grow. The chapter of discovery had only begun. For a long time after the children's laughter faded, William just stood there in the courtyard. The sun had begun to lower behind the city skyline, and the golden light slanted through the broken windows, scattering across the dusty floors of the community center. The colours reminded him of another time, long before the boardrooms and luxury towers, a time when he had once held Ethan on his shoulders to watch fireworks. He hadn't thought about that night in years. Father Gabriel's voice pulled him back. "Would you like to see where he taught?" the priest asked quietly. William nodded. They stepped into a small room that smelled of old paper and chalk dust. A whiteboard leaned crookedly against the wall, its surface covered in half-erased equations. Children's handwriting decorated the edges, crooked letters, doodles of stars and stick figures. On one side, in neat blue marker, Ethan had written a line, "You can build a better world, one number at a time." William's throat tightened. He could hear Ethan's voice saying it, calm and patient, the same tone he'd once used when trying to explain his dreams to his father. He believed every child here could do something extraordinary, Father Gabriel said. He didn't see them as charity cases. He saw them as equals. William ran his hand along the desk, tracing the shallow grooves in the wood where someone had carved initials. "He was always softer than me," he said. "I used to think it made him weak." The priest studied him. "And now?" William gave a tired smile. "Now, I think it made him human." Outside, Sophie was reading aloud to a group of younger children. Her voice carried faintly through the open window. She was reading from The Little Prince, the same words that had once belonged to his son. He listened for a moment, then turned back to Father Gabriel. "How did you know him?" he asked. "I met him through one of our outreach programs," Gabriel said. "He showed up one morning wearing a suit. I thought he was lost. Then he started helping fix the roof. Never asked for attention, just worked." William almost laughed. "A suit," he murmured. "Of course he did." The priest smiled. He kept wearing it, week after week, until the children made fun of him for it. Then one day he showed up in jeans and said, "Now I fit in." The image hurt and healed him at once. He could see Ethan standing there, awkward but determined, trying to belong in a place his father had never imagined him. For the first time, William wondered how many versions of his son he had never met. As he left the center, the evening had deepened into a violet haze. Sophie ran to catch up with him at the gate. "Will you come back?" she asked. He looked down at her, her eyes wide, hopeful. "Yes," he said. "There's a lot I still need to learn." That night, back at his mansion, the silence felt different. Not just empty, questioning. The housekeeper, Mrs. Adeline, met him in the hallway, her expression carefully polite. "You're home earlier than usual, sir," she said. "I had somewhere important to be," he replied. She hesitated, then said gently, "You look tired." "I am," he admitted, "but it's not the kind of tired sleep can fix." In the study, he poured himself a drink but didn't touch it. The shelves around him were lined with awards, framed newspaper articles, contracts, a museum of his ambition. For the first time, they looked meaningless. On the desk sat Ethan's old laptop, untouched since the funeral. He hesitated, then opened it. The password was his son's birthday. The desktop filled with folders, project reports, spreadsheets, photos. But one folder stood out, labeled Saturday Lessons. Inside were dozens of documents, lesson plans, scanned drawings, lists of student names. At the bottom was a draft of an email. Its subject line read, "Resignation Letter." William opened it. "Father," it began, "I know this will disappoint you, but I can't keep living your dream when it's not mine. I want to help people, not just build things. Maybe one day you'll understand. I love you, even if you don't agree with me. Ethan." William's breath caught. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. The glow from the monitor threw faint light across his face. "You were going to quit," he whispered, "and I stopped you." He remembered their last argument, Ethan's voice steady but pleading. "I don't want your company, Dad. I want a purpose." And his own reply, cold and certain, "Purpose doesn't pay the bills." He had thought he was protecting his son. Now he saw he'd only been protecting his pride. A soft knock came from the door. "Mrs. Adeline peeked in. "I heard voices," she said. "Are you all right?" He wiped at his eyes before answering. Just remembering. She stepped inside, her gaze falling on the open laptop. He used to sit in here late at night, she said, typing away, smiling to himself. I asked him once what he was doing. He said, changing lives one child at a time. I thought it was just a phrase. William managed a faint smile. So did I. She hesitated at the door. He was proud of you, you know, she said quietly, even when you didn't see it. After she left, he sat there for a long time, reading through Ethan's files. He saw photos from the community center, children laughing, Ethan kneeling beside them, teaching, painting, building. Each image was a revelation. The more he saw, the clearer it became. His son hadn't been escaping him. He had been becoming himself. At midnight, William closed the laptop and walked to the window. The city lights stretched endlessly below, the skyline dotted with the towers his company had built. But for the first time he wondered who they were really for. He thought about Sophie and the children, about the crumbling building that carried more hope than any of his skyscrapers, and he knew what he had to do next. When dawn came, he was already dressed for the office. The driver was surprised to see him waiting by the door, holding a folder under his arm. "You're early today, sir," the man said. "Not early," William replied. "Just finally on time." As the car pulled away, he looked once more at the sunrise. It was pale, uncertain, but beautiful. The kind of morning that didn't ask for permission to begin again. He had spent years building walls of glass and steel. Now he was ready to build something else. The echo of Ethan's voice lingered in his mind. You can build a better world, one number at a time. And William whispered to himself, then let's start counting. The next morning, the city was wrapped in a thin fog that blurred the skyline. William rode in silence, his hands folded over a leather folder that contained the plans for a new project. But this time it wasn't another luxury tower. It was a proposal to restore the community center where Ethan had spent his weekends. The driver glanced at him in the mirror. "Heading to the usual office, sir?" he asked. William shook his head. "No, we're going somewhere else today." When they reached the south side, the mist had started to lift. The familiar cracked pavement and graffiti-covered walls greeted him like a memory he'd borrowed from someone else's life. Sophie was waiting at the gate again, her face brightening as soon as she saw the car stop. "You came back," she said. "I told you I would," he replied. She led him inside, where the children were already gathering for their morning lessons. Father Gabriel stood near the doorway, speaking to a woman who balanced a box of donated books on her hip. When he saw William, he smiled. "Mr. Hartley," the priest said, "back so soon." "I said I wanted to understand what my son cared about," William answered. "I'm a slow learner, but I'm trying." The priest nodded, motioning him forward. "Then let me show you what he built." They walked through narrow halls filled with color and noise. Children's laughter echoed off the chipped paint, mixing with the faint smell of chalk and old wood. In one classroom, a group of teenagers huddled around a single computer, its screen flickering. William stopped to watch them. "They share that one," Father Gabriel said. "It barely works, but they make the most of it." William's hand tightened around the folder. "That's going to change," he said. He followed the priest to a small office lined with donated furniture. A faded cross hung on the wall, and beneath it sat a filing cabinet overflowing with papers. Father Gabriel gestured for him to sit. "When Ethan came here, we were struggling to stay open," he said. "The roof leaked, the heating barely worked. But he brought hope, not just help. He believed these children deserved the same opportunities he had." William leaned forward. "He never told me any of this, not one word." "Maybe he didn't think you'd understand then," the priest replied gently. "But you're here now." Before William could answer, Sophie appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Hartley," she said, "the kids want to show you something." He followed her outside to the courtyard. A group of children stood around a painted board resting on bricks. The drawing was rough but full of color. A picture of a tree growing from the open pages of a book. Across the top they had written, "For Ethan, who believed in us." A small boy pointed proudly at it. "We made it for him," the boy said. "Do you like it?" William crouched down, his voice unsteady. "It's beautiful," he said, He would have loved it. Sophie added quietly, he already did. He helped start it. The moment felt suspended, sunlight cutting through the fog to touch the colors of the mural. Something about it, raw and imperfect, felt more alive than anything William had ever built. A man's voice broke through the stillness behind him. "So this is where you've been hiding," the voice said. William turned to see Victor Hale, his business partner, standing at the gate in a dark overcoat, his expression sharp. "Victor," William said, straightening, "what are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same," Victor replied. "The office called me. You cancelled 2 meetings, redirected funds, and disappeared to this place." "This place," William said slowly, "is where my son spent his time, where he actually made a difference." Victor's tone turned cutting. "You're throwing away decades of work, William. We have investors waiting, projects in progress." "I'm aware," William said, "but I'm also aware that one of those projects would demolish this neighborhood." Victor frowned. "It's business. You taught me that. We build, they move. The city grows." "They lose their homes," William replied quietly. "The same homes where my son found purpose." The children had stopped to listen, their faces uncertain. William saw Sophie watching him, her eyes wide. He took a breath, steadying himself. "Not this time," he said to Victor. "Not this project." Victor stepped closer. "You're making a mistake," he said flatly. "Maybe," William replied, "but it's one I can live with." Victor looked at him for a long moment, then turned away. "You're not the man I used to know," he said over his shoulder. "No," William answered. "I'm not." When Victor left, the air seemed lighter. The children went back to painting, and Father Gabriel approached quietly. "You just did something brave," he said. William shook his head. "No, I just stopped doing what's easy." Later that afternoon, he sat under a tree at the edge of the courtyard while Sophie told him stories about Ethan. "He used to bring breakfast sometimes," she said. "Not for himself, just for us. Said food helps people listen." William smiled faintly. He was right. "He also told jokes," she added. "Bad ones. But we laughed anyway." He laughed softly too, a sound that felt strange coming from him. "He always tried too hard to make people smile," he said. "I used to tell him it was a waste of time." Sophie tilted her head. Maybe it wasn't. He looked at her then, realizing how much his son had given her. A chance, a voice, a future. "You're right," he said. "Maybe it was everything." As the day faded, William walked through the center one last time. The walls were cracked, the paint peeling, the lights dim. Yet in every room he saw life. He saw Ethan's laughter in the scribbles on the board, his hope in the children's eyes. It was imperfect, but it was real. When he reached the front gate, Father Gabriel called after him. "What will you do now?" he asked. William turned back, his expression steady. "I'm going to fix the roof," he said, "and then I'm going to fix everything else." The priest smiled. "Ethan would be proud." "I hope so," William said. That night he drafted a new set of blueprints, ones that would never make him richer, but might finally make him whole. The design was for a building that could outlast guilt and greed. Classrooms, computers, light, laughter, a place to carry on his son's work. Outside, the fog returned, curling around the edges of the city like a curtain drawing closed. But inside the Hartley home, a single lamp burned through the night as William kept working. He had built towers to touch the sky. Now he was learning how to build something that could reach hearts instead. The next morning, the boardroom felt colder than usual. Glass walls surrounded the long mahogany table, reflecting the grey light of the city. William stood at the head of it, hands resting on a folder marked Southgate Redevelopment Project. Around him, the partners whispered quietly, waiting for him to begin. Victor Hale sat across from him, his expression carved from stone. "I've delayed this project twice," Victor said, his tone clipped. "Investors are losing patience. We need your signature today." William didn't sit. "I'm not signing," he said simply. The room fell silent. Victor's eyebrow twitched. "Excuse me?" William opened the folder and pushed it toward the center of the table. This redevelopment plan would level an entire neighborhood, the same neighborhood where my son volunteered. One of the younger executives shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Hartley, with all due respect, that area's already condemned. The profits— I'm not interested in profits, William interrupted. Not anymore. Victor leaned forward, his voice lowering to a hiss. You're throwing away everything we've built. Ethan's gone, William. You can't bring him back by playing savior in the slums. William met his stare without blinking. No, but I can stop pretending money fixes everything. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Victor stood, gathering his papers with sharp precision. If you go through with this, he said, you'll lose your position as CEO. The board will side with me. William's reply was calm. Then I'll step down. The words rippled through the room like a shockwave. Victor froze, papers still in hand. You can't be serious, he said. I've never been more serious, William replied. Sell my shares if you have to. But this project dies here. When Victor finally left, slamming the door behind him, William sank into his chair. The weight of his decision settled over him like a storm, but underneath it was something else, something lighter. Relief. Later that day, Mrs. Adeline found him in his office, staring out over the skyline. I heard what happened, she said. He smiled faintly. I suppose bad news travels fast. Are you all right? She asked. For the first time in years, he said. I think I might be. That evening he returned to the community center. The sound of hammers echoed through the halls, volunteers repairing walls, children laughing in the background. Sophie ran up to him, her face bright. Father Gabriel said you sent materials, she said. New paint, wood, even computers. I thought we'd start small, William replied. Then we'll see how far we can go. She grinned. You sound like Ethan. The comparison made him pause. I hope so, he said softly. As they walked through the renovated halls, Father Gabriel approached, wiping dust from his hands. Word spreads quickly, he said. We've already had calls from other neighborhoods asking if they can start programs like ours. William looked around at the activity, at people working together without asking for anything in return. Maybe that's how it begins, he said. One place at a time. The priest nodded. It's a start, but it won't be easy. It shouldn't be, William said. If it were easy, I would have done it years ago. They laughed quietly together before the sound of a car outside drew William's attention. Through the window, he saw Victor stepping out, his face dark with anger. Stay here, William told Sophie. Victor strode into the courtyard, ignoring the curious stares of volunteers. So, this is where our money's going, he said. Charity work and sentiment. It's not charity, William answered. It's rebuilding. Victor gestured to the old walls. You're ruining your reputation, your fortune for this, for a handful of strangers? For my son, William said evenly, for what he believed in. Victor's eyes narrowed. He's gone, William. He's not coming back. William stepped closer. Maybe not, but what he stood for doesn't have to die with him. The tension hung heavy between them. Finally, Victor shook his head. You'll regret this, he said, turning away. William watched him go, then exhaled slowly. Sophie came to stand beside him. He doesn't understand, she said. He doesn't have to, William replied. I finally do. That night, the volunteers finished painting the walls. The old grey hallways became bursts of color, yellows, blues, reds. At the center of the main room, someone painted a quote from Ethan's notebook. Kindness is the only legacy worth leaving. William stood quietly in front of it. Father Gabriel came to his side and said, He used to say that all the time. I never realized how much he meant it. I didn't either, William said, but now I do. He spent the next days signing papers, transferring money, making calls. Reporters began to take notice. Articles appeared with headlines questioning his sudden change, some admiring, others skeptical. When a journalist called to ask if the foundation was a publicity stunt, William simply replied, It's not about me anymore. One evening, he found Sophie sitting on the steps outside, sketching the new mural. You've been here every day, he said as he sat beside her. She smiled. You too. He looked at her drawing. "That's very good," he said. "You have talent." "Ethan said that too," she replied. "He told me to never stop drawing, no matter what." William glanced at the half-finished picture, a tree growing from an open book, its branches stretching toward the sun. "Did he ever tell you why he liked trees so much?" he asked. Sophie nodded. "He said they take time, that you can't rush them. You just have to plant the seed and wait." William was quiet for a moment, then said, "He was right about that too." As night settled, the streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the courtyard. The community centre glowed from within, filled with voices and laughter. For the first time in years, William didn't feel like an outsider looking in. He stood, brushing dust from his hands. "Come on," he said to Sophie. "Let's see what we can build next." The two of them walked back inside, where fresh paint still gleamed and the air smelled faintly of hope. And somewhere in the background, carried by memory rather than sound, Ethan's voice seemed to echo, "Keep dreaming." The rain came 2 nights later, soft at first, then steady enough to drum against the windows of the Hartley mansion. William sat alone in the study, the faint light from a single lamp stretching long shadows across the floor. The blueprints for the new education fund were spread across his desk, but his eyes weren't on them. They were on a framed photograph of Ethan as a child, smiling in a park, holding a kite that was almost bigger than he was. He whispered quietly to the empty room, "I don't even remember that day." The sound of rain filled the silence. He closed his eyes and thought about what Father Gabriel had said, about forgiveness, about finding meaning through action. But there were still words left unspoken, apologies never heard. He needed to say them somewhere. The next morning the storm had passed. William drove through wet streets until he reached St. Brigid's Cemetery. The clouds were breaking apart, leaving streaks of pale sunlight over the rows of stones. He carried no flowers this time, only a small notebook that had belonged to Ethan, found among his things the night before. When he reached the grave, he knelt down, tracing his fingers over his son's name. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, quietly, he began. "I used to think control was strength," he said aloud. "That success was love. I was wrong." He paused, the wind rustling the trees above him. "You were trying to show me what mattered, and I couldn't see it. I thought I was protecting you from failure. But I was really protecting myself, from the idea that you might be better than me." The confession hung in the air, raw and uneven. He opened the notebook, flipping through Ethan's messy handwriting. Lists of lesson plans, sketches, notes for his students. In one margin, Ethan had written a short line. "If I ever have to choose between love and approval, I'll choose love." William's voice broke as he read it. "You already did, didn't you?" he said. "You chose love. You chose them. You chose life." A quiet footstep made him turn. Sophie was standing a few feet away, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. "I didn't mean to interrupt," she said softly. "I just come here sometimes." He nodded for her to join him. She knelt beside him, setting the flowers next to the headstone. "I brought him the same kind as before," she said. "He liked these best." William gave a faint smile. "He told you that?" She shook her head. "No, but I think he would have." They stayed there for a while without speaking. The air smelled of rain and earth. Then William said, "You told me once he cried in front of the children. I can't stop thinking about that. I keep wondering what I said that day, how much it hurt him." Sophie looked down. "He said he tried to tell you he wanted to quit the company, to do this full time. You told him it was a waste." "I remember," William said quietly. "I told him he was throwing away everything I built." He exhaled slowly, staring at the grave. "I didn't know I was the one throwing something away." Sophie hesitated before speaking again. "He forgave you, you know. He told us that before he left that day." William turned to her, surprised. "He said that?" She nodded. "He said, 'My dad will understand someday. Maybe not now, but someday.'" His chest tightened, the ache sharper than before. "I don't deserve that kind of forgiveness." Sophie looked at him steadily. "Maybe no one does. But he gave it anyway." He let the words settle, the wind carrying them through the trees. Finally he said, "You're wiser than most adults I know." She smiled faintly. That's because I had good teachers. He almost laughed, the sound low and broken. Yes, he said, you did. When they left the cemetery, the clouds had parted completely, revealing a washed-out sky. On the drive back, Sophie stared out the window, watching sunlight catch in the puddles. At one point, she said, "Father Gabriel told us about what you're doing. The fund, the computers, all of it." "I'm just trying to keep his work alive," William replied. "You're doing more than that," she said. "You're changing things." He looked at her, thoughtful. "Maybe, but it doesn't feel like enough." "It never will," Sophie said simply. "That's how you know it matters." When he dropped her off, she waved and ran up the steps to her apartment. William watched her disappear inside, then leaned back in his seat. For a moment, he saw Ethan in her place, smiling, alive, full of plans. That night, he returned to the community center. The new computers had arrived, still sealed in boxes. Volunteers worked late, unpacking equipment, setting up tables. Father Gabriel was there too, his sleeves rolled up, painting a doorway. "You're back," the priest said when he saw William. "I needed to keep my promise," William replied. "And to ask you something." Father Gabriel set down his brush. "Go on." "Do you believe people can really change?" William asked. The priest wiped his hands on a rag before answering. "Change isn't an event," he said. "It's a choice you keep making every day. Some days you fail, but if you keep choosing, it becomes who you are." William nodded slowly. "Then I'll keep choosing." He spent the rest of the night helping where he could, lifting boxes, adjusting cables, even cleaning paint off the floor. The volunteers watched him with surprise at first, then quiet respect. By the time they finished, it was nearly midnight. As he stood in the empty hall, William looked around. The new lights glowed softly across the fresh paint. On one wall, someone had hung a framed photo of Ethan surrounded by the children. Beneath it, in neat handwriting, a line read, "He taught us more than math." William smiled, a small, tired, honest smile. "He's still teaching," he said under his breath. When he stepped outside, the night was calm, the air cool and clean after the rain. He looked up at the sky and spoke quietly, not to anyone around him, but to the memory that still lived somewhere above. "I can't undo what I did, Ethan," he said, "but I can live the way you wanted to. That's my promise." And for the first time since his son's death, he didn't feel alone when he said it. By the time summer arrived, word of the new education fund had spread far beyond the neighborhood. Newspapers called it the Hartley Initiative, while others whispered that it was nothing more than guilt disguised as charity. William didn't read the headlines anymore. He was too busy trying to keep his promise. The community center had grown. New classrooms were opening, volunteers arriving each week. Yet with growth came resistance, bureaucracy, politics, suspicion. One morning, a local official visited the site, clipboard in hand. "You'll need new permits for expansion," the man said, "and additional safety inspections. These things take time." William kept his voice steady. "Then we'll start the paperwork today. I'm not letting this stall." The man nodded, half impressed, half irritated, and walked away muttering about procedures. Sophie appeared from one of the classrooms, her hands covered in paint. "What did he want?" she asked. "Red tape," William replied. "Apparently doing the right thing still needs signatures." She laughed. "Ethan used to say that paperwork was the universe's way of testing your patience." William smiled faintly. "Then I suppose I'm finally taking the test." Over the next weeks, he faced other tests. Several investors withdrew from his company, following Victor's lead. Some accused him of losing his edge, but William no longer cared. For the first time in decades, he was building something he believed in. One afternoon, a journalist showed up at the center, microphone in hand, cameras following. "Mr. Hartley," she began, "many people say this sudden change of heart is just a publicity stunt to repair your image. How do you respond?" William looked directly into the camera. "You're welcome to think that," he said. "But if helping these children gives them a better future, I don't mind what people call it." The journalist blinked, momentarily disarmed. "So this isn't about redemption?" He answered quietly. "It's about continuation. My son started something here. I'm just trying to keep it alive." That night the clip aired on the evening news. Some mocked him, others were moved. But what mattered to William were the calls that came afterward. Parents asking how to enroll their children, teachers volunteering their time, donors offering supplies. Still, not everyone approved. Victor arrived at his office unannounced 2 days later. He didn't knock. "You're bleeding money, William," he said the moment he entered. "Half the board's ready to vote you out. The media's tearing you apart." William didn't look up from the report he was reading. "If they want to remove me, let them." Victor's voice rose. "You've lost perspective. You're throwing your career away for, what? For some dead man's ideals?" William finally met his gaze. "He wasn't some dead man," he said calmly. "He was my son." Victor's jaw tightened. "And now you're sacrificing everything for a ghost." "I'm not sacrificing anything," William replied. "I'm finally doing something that matters." Victor shook his head, his voice dripping with disbelief. "You used to be a giant in this city. Now you're standing in classrooms with children handing out notebooks." William stood slowly, his tone measured. "Then maybe I was never a giant. Maybe I was just standing on the wrong ground." For a moment, Victor had no answer. Then he turned sharply and left, the door echoing shut behind him. That same evening, the community center held a small ceremony to mark the completion of its new wing. The smell of fresh paint lingered in the air, and handmade decorations hung from the ceiling. William stood at the back, unnoticed at first, watching the children run and laugh. Father Gabriel found him there. "You're not going to speak?" he asked. William shook his head. "This isn't about me." But when the priest called his name to the front, the crowd began to applaud, and William had no choice but to step up. He hesitated before the microphone, the noise settling into quiet anticipation. "I used to think success was measured in buildings," he said. "Now I know it's measured in people. My son understood that long before I did. Everything you see here, this place, these faces, it exists because of him, and because of those who believed in what he believed." His voice faltered for a moment, but he continued. "Ethan taught me that wealth isn't what you keep, it's what you give away." The applause that followed wasn't loud, but it was genuine. Later, as the crowd thinned, Sophie approached him with a folded sheet of paper. "I wrote something for tonight," she said. "I was too nervous to read it out loud." He took the paper and unfolded it. Her handwriting was neat, careful. It read, "Dear Mr. Hartley, you didn't just build classrooms. You built second chances. Ethan used to tell us that one day the world would notice the quiet good we do. I think today it did." William felt his eyes sting. "You should have read this yourself," he said softly. She shrugged. "Maybe next time," he smiled. "There will be a next time." The night ended with laughter, soft music, and the faint hum of hope in the air. But as William drove home, he knew the road ahead was far from smooth. Change never came without resistance, and redemption never came without pain. When he reached the mansion, the house felt less like a tomb than it once had. On the hallway table sat a framed copy of the community center's logo, a tree growing from an open book. He paused to look at it, running his hand over the glass. Mrs. Adeline stepped out from the kitchen, drying her hands. "Long day?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "A long life, but it's finally heading somewhere worth going." She nodded approvingly. Ethan would have liked that. "I hope so," he said quietly. Before going to bed, he stood at the window overlooking the city. The towers he had built glittered in the distance, but his gaze drifted south, to where the lights of the community center still burned. For the first time, he didn't see it as a project. He saw it as a promise kept. Somewhere in the wind outside, he could almost hear Ethan's voice again, not as memory this time, but as presence. It seemed to say, "You finally see it, don't you?" And William answered softly to the night, "Yes, I see it now." The morning of the inauguration dawned bright and clear, the kind of morning that seemed to carry forgiveness in its light. The newly renovated building stood at the corner of Brookside Avenue, its walls painted in soft cream and gold, the name engraved on a polished bronze plaque, the Ethan Hartley Education Center. William arrived early, before the guests, before the cameras. The courtyard was quiet except for the rustle of the wind in the trees. Volunteers had set up rows of chairs, ribbons and flowers, wildflowers, the kind Sophie always brought to Ethan's grave. Their color burst against the concrete like a living promise. He stood before the plaque, tracing the letters of his son's name. "We made it, Ethan," he said quietly. "You started it, and we finished it." Sophie appeared beside him, dressed in a white blouse and holding a small folder. "They'll be here soon," she said. "Reporters, families, city officials. Everyone wants to see it." He looked down at her. "Are you nervous?" "A little," she admitted. "But I think he'd want this." William nodded. He would. People began to arrive, children from the old community center, parents, teachers, volunteers. The sound of laughter and conversation filled the air. At the front of the crowd, Father Gabriel spoke with the mayor, both smiling as they surveyed the building. When the time came, Gabriel approached the microphone. "Today," he began, "we celebrate more than a building. We celebrate a legacy, a young man who believed in possibility, and a father who learned that love can build more than money ever could." He turned toward William. "Mr. Hartley, would you do us the honor?" William stepped forward, scissors in hand. For a moment he hesitated, overwhelmed by the memory of another ribbon, decades earlier, when he had opened his company's first skyscraper. He remembered the applause, the flashing cameras, the pride. But this felt different. There was no ego here, no hunger for admiration, just purpose. He cut the ribbon. The crowd erupted in applause. Sophie was clapping too, tears glinting in her eyes. "He'd be proud," she said as he joined her. William smiled. "He'd tell me I took long enough." Inside, the rooms were bright and full of life. New computers lined the walls, bookshelves stretched floor to ceiling, and colorful murals told stories of learning and hope. One painting showed a boy with a book in one hand and a tree sprouting from the other. Beneath it were the words, "Grow what you give." Reporters crowded around asking questions, but William only answered a few. When one of them asked, "What do you hope this center will achieve?" he paused before replying. "I hope," he said, "that it reminds people we all have more to give than we think, that success isn't measured in what we build, but in who we lift." After the ceremony, as the guests began to leave, William found himself standing alone again in the courtyard. Sophie joined him, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers. "I saved these," she said. "I thought we could take them to the cemetery." He nodded. "Let's go." The drive was quiet. The city shimmered in the distance, alive with noise and motion, but neither of them spoke until they reached the gates of St. Bridget's. The path was familiar now, the air calm. When they reached Ethan's grave, Sophie knelt down and placed the flowers beside the stone. "Hi, Ethan," she said softly. "We did it." William stood beside her, his hands clasped in front of him. "I used to come here and talk to you like I was asking for something," he said. "Forgiveness, mostly. But now I think you already gave it, so I just came to say thank you." He crouched, running his fingers over the carved letters. "You changed more lives than I ever did, but I'm trying to catch up." Sophie looked at him. "You already have." He smiled faintly. "Not yet, but maybe one day." They stayed for a while, neither in a hurry to leave. The sun hung low, turning the sky gold. When they finally walked back to the car, William glanced over his shoulder one last time. The wildflowers, bright against the stone, seemed to belong there, as if they had always been waiting for this day. On the drive back, Sophie looked out the window, her voice thoughtful. "Do you ever think he's still here somehow?" William answered, "All the time. Every time I hear laughter in that building, I know he is." She smiled. "Then he's not really gone." "No," William said. "He's everywhere I finally learned to look." Back at the center, the evening light poured through the tall windows, illuminating the faces of children studying at new desks. The sound of their voices echoed through the halls, alive and unrestrained. William walked to the front steps and watched them. The city skyline stood far behind him, the same towers he had once built to touch the clouds. They still glittered, but they no longer defined him. As the sun began to set, he whispered to himself, "You taught me what real wealth is, Ethan. And I'll never stop spending it." He turned back toward the center, the laughter growing louder, the light spilling across his face. And in that moment, surrounded by everything his son had loved, William Hartley finally felt at peace.